So today we're going to be talking a little bit about God's promises and how we as humans doubt those promises. And so if you've ever found yourself doubting God's promises, by the end of this video, you're going to learn how other women have overcome this and how they've been able to achieve God's promises despite the doubt that we sometimes encounter. So, for the best revelation of how to manifest the lifestyle that God has for you, be sure to hit subscribe and the bell below to be notified when a new video drops. All right, ladies? So, what qualifies me to discuss this and discuss, doubting God's promises? Well, I was lost at some point, right? It's as far as my path, my purpose. I went to school and got my PhD in psychology, and I thought and understood that my purpose was to support others. But when I started off in my career and as I got deeper and deeper into it, I still felt unfulfilled. I still felt like the things that I wanted and the promises that God had made me were not being manifested. And so I went through this process of getting to know God better and submitting myself more to his word and being obedient to really manifest the lifestyle that God had intended for me. And so, if you're interested in that, please stay tuned and check us out. All right. So today we're going to be talking about Sarah or Sarai in the Bible. And we're going to be specifically focusing on Genesis 18 verses 10 to 12, where it says, "Then the Lord said, I will surely return to you this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure?" So Sarai, her original name, was married to Abraham. And Abraham had a promise from God that he was going to be father to many. And he had this promise while married to Sarai and being old in age, and Sarai not having had the opportunity to bear any children. And so Sarai thought of this ingenious idea to get a maidservant and give this maidservant to Abraham in order to fulfill God's promise. So she really stepped in the way and, gave the maidservant. The maidservant did bear children, but when Sarai saw that she had given him children, she became jealous and upset, and she sent her away. And so then God comes back to reaffirm for Abraham, who then he named Abraham, reaffirm the promise that he had initially made. And the promise was that he was going to bear children and be father to many. And Sarai hears the promise and kind of chuckles at it and is like, really? Like, at this point when I'm old? And God rebukes them, and God changes Abraham's name to Abraham, and he changes Sarai's name to Sarah. And so the verse is not explicit and the Bible is not explicit, but what we understand is that she must have been really, stunned and shocked and really scared of the fact that God had given this promise to Abraham, and that she had been rebuked by her laughing of it. And so we want to look at 5 different things that Sarah did. First of all, Sarah was not aware of her promise. She thought that, she didn't know what her promise was, and she thought that the promise that her husband had was really for her husband, that it wasn't a promise for her. So she was not aware of the promise. Secondly, she thought that her current state was pertinent to her promise. So she thought that her state of barrenness and the fact that she was out of the age range for childbearing would disqualify her from God's promise. She also kind of intervened and concocted her own plan, where she decided to bring in the maidservant and, with her own strength, might, and understanding, make this God's promise come through by giving Abraham the maidservant to have children. And so she kind of stuck her hand in the mix, right? Without that being part of God's promise. She eventually had to figure out that she needed to give control up. She could not make Abraham have children. She could not behave herself or move herself or plan herself into that promise was completely up to God. And it seemed impossible. It was realistically and logically not reasonable. However, she had to step out of that, and she had to step out of God's way to really allow God the control and give him the will to make this promise come to faith, and this promise come to life. And so the fifth thing that we see, sorry about that. The fifth thing that we see is that in spite of Sarah's lack of trust, despite her doubting God's promises, despite her not owning the promise and even intervening and messing it up with her own, reasoning and behaviors, God was firm to his promise. And we see that God was firm to his promise because this was not really about Sarah and Abraham. This was about his kingdom, about furthering his plan. And God was not going to let Sarah's or Sarai's interference mess with his purpose and his kingdom, which is ultimately, what God is working towards. And so we see, there's plenty of ways that, God can make promises, and God's, ordain things over our lives. And many times we doubt those promises. We laugh at those promises. We think that's not possible. That's not for me. That's above me, beneath me. And really we see through Sarah's story that when God calls you and he says that something is going to come to pass, we really need to surrender and give control and allow God to take the wheel and make things happen according to his will. And that's really part of how we manifest what God wants for us as a lifestyle. We manifest into life the things that God wants for us by relinquishing our control, by being obedient and letting God handle what's going on. So, I want to encourage you guys that if you're interested in learning more about manifesting God's lifestyle in your life, and you're interested in more information, to check out our Instagram at Unorthodox_Group. And then don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more ways to build your life and your promises and your purpose. Have a blessed day.